The story you think you know about Dorothy and her ruby slippers is incomplete. Hollywood changed one detail when they made the 1939 movie, one detail that completely transforms what this film actually means. In the original book, Dorothy's slippers weren't ruby at all. They were silver, and those silver slippers might hold a coded message about the greatest economic crisis of the 1890s, a hidden warning about corrupt bankers, fraudulent politicians, and a rigged system designed to crush ordinary Americans. L. Frank Baum may have embedded this message in a children's story, hiding clues in every character, every road, every piece of magic. Once you understand what to look for, everything about this beloved tale transforms into something far more complex and far more controversial than you ever imagined. The year was 1900. Congress had just passed the Gold Standard Act, officially crushing the hopes of millions of struggling farmers and workers. That same year, L. Frank Baum published The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and whether he intended it or not, the symbols in his story aligned perfectly with the political battles tearing America apart. Baum had lived in South Dakota during the worst of it, running a newspaper while watching his neighbors lose everything. He'd witnessed the foreclosures, the failing banks, the desperate families pawning wedding rings just to buy flour. He'd seen an entire economic system grinding up ordinary people, while politicians in Washington preached about how necessary it all was. And then he wrote a fairy tale, a simple children's story about a girl trying to get home. But hidden beneath that whimsical surface might be something far more dangerous, a coded manifesto. Every character, every magical element potentially serving as a weapon, aimed at the men who destroyed the American heartland. He disguised his message as entertainment for children, which might be the only reason it survived. In 1964, a scholar named Henry Littlefield published an article that changed how people saw this story forever. He revealed connections that seemed too precise to be accidental, symbolic alignments that fit the political struggles of the 1890s so perfectly that scholars are still debating whether Baum was a secret radical or whether we're all seeing patterns where none exist. Here's what you need to know before we go further. Baum never confirmed any of this. There's no letter, no diary entry, no confession. He stated the book was meant to entertain children. Littlefield himself later admitted his article was meant as a teaching tool, not proof of Baum's intent. What we're about to explore is an interpretation that might reveal hidden truth, or might be the greatest case of reading too much into a children's book in literary history. But here's why millions of people find this theory compelling. The symbols align too well. The timing is too perfect, and once you see these connections, you can't unsee them. So let's start with that one. Crucial detail Hollywood had to change, the detail that might unravel the entire hidden message. When you picture Dorothy's magical shoes, you see ruby slippers sparkling in Technicolor. That image is burned into American culture. Judy Garland clicking her heels together, those brilliant red shoes catching the light as she repeats, "There's no place like home." The American Film Institute later ranked Over the Rainbow as the #1 greatest movie song of all time, and those ruby slippers are inseparable from that iconic moment. But in L. Frank Baum's original book, published on May 17, 1900, Dorothy's slippers aren't ruby. They're silver. MGM changed them for a simple reason. Technicolor. Ruby slippers looked spectacular on screen, vibrant and eye-catching in the new color film technology. Silver would have looked dull, almost grey, underwhelming. The studio made a visual choice that accidentally erased what might be the most important political symbol in the entire story, because those silver slippers might represent the solution to America's greatest economic crisis. They might represent silver currency, bimetallism, the political movement that promised to save millions of farmers and workers from financial ruin. And here's where Baum's genius shows through. If the theory is correct, Dorothy walks the entire story on the yellow brick road, the gold standard path that everyone tells her to follow, while wearing the silver solution on her feet the whole time. The answer to her problems isn't the golden road at all. It's the silver she's been wearing from the beginning, and she just doesn't realize it until the very end. But to understand why this matters, why silver versus gold was literally a matter of survival for millions of Americans, we need to go back to the 1890s, to one of the darkest economic periods this country has ever faced. The Panic of 1893 triggered a massive economic depression that devastated America. Banks failed across the country. Businesses collapsed overnight. Unemployment soared to levels that wouldn't be seen again until the Great Depression. And at the center of all this suffering sat a political battle that sounds incredibly boring, but was actually tearing the nation apart: monetary policy. The United States based its currency on the gold standard, which meant the money supply was limited to however much gold the government held in reserve. Eastern bankers, industrialists, and conservative politicians defended this system because it kept currency stable and valuable. But for farmers and workers, the gold standard was a slow-motion execution. Here's how it destroyed them. The gold standard kept money scarce. Scarce money meant falling prices across the economy. Falling prices meant the wheat a farmer grew in 1890 was worth significantly less by 1895. But his mortgage debt stayed exactly the same. Every year, farmers produced the same crops, maybe even more, but earned less money while owing the same amount to banks that had no mercy. The math was impossible. Farmers were drowning, and the system was designed to keep them underwater. Workers faced similar destruction. Factory conditions were brutal in the 1890s. Long hours, dangerous machinery, no safety regulations, child labour grinding up young bodies for profit, and wages kept dropping because scarce money gave employers all the power. If you got injured on the job, you starved. If you lost your job, your family starved. There was no safety net, no unemployment insurance, no worker protections. Railroad monopolies controlled shipping costs, charging farmers whatever they wanted to transport crops to market. Banks, following orders from financial centres in New York and Boston, foreclosed on farms with coal deficiency. Families who'd built their land with bare hands over decades watched sheriffs auction off everything they owned. The solution, according to a growing political movement, was bimetallism. Base the currency on both gold and silver instead of gold alone. This would increase the money supply, make it easier to pay off debts, cause some inflation that would actually help debtors instead of creditors, and shift economic power away from Eastern bankers toward ordinary working people. This movement exploded into a political force called populism, forming its own party, the People's Party, in 1891. And the face of this movement was a man with a voice that could shake buildings and make audiences weep. Picture the Chicago Coliseum on July 9, 1896. The Democratic National Convention is in chaos. The party is splitting over the gold standard. Old guard Democrats want to keep it. Populists want silver added to the money supply. The debate has raged for days, getting more heated, more desperate. Then a young man takes the stage. He's only 36 years old, relatively unknown nationally. His name is William Jennings Bryan, and he's about to deliver a speech that will change American politics forever. Bryan approaches the podium. When he speaks, his voice explodes across the convention hall with a power that makes people gasp. He builds to his conclusion, and then comes the moment that will echo through history. Bryan spreads his arms wide, literally embodying Christ on the cross, and his voice rings out, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labour this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." The crowd erupts. Bryan captures the Democratic nomination that day and runs for president on a platform of silver currency and populist reform. He had the raw. God, did he have the raw? His voice could make Wall Street bankers tremble. His speeches drew crowds of thousands. People wept when he spoke. But when November came, he lost. The banking interests mobilized everything they had. They spent more money than had ever been spent on a presidential election, terrified voters with predictions of economic collapse if Silver won, and crushed Bryan's campaign. He would run twice, more for president, in 1900 and 1908, losing both times. The lion who could make the powerful tremble with his voice couldn't find the courage or political skill to actually win when it mattered most. L. Frank Baum watched all of this happen, and then he wrote about a lion with a magnificent roar who was too cowardly to use his power. Baum was born on May 15, 1856, in Chittenango, New York. He worked as an author, newspaper editor, and playwright throughout his career. But what matters most for understanding the alleged hidden meaning is this. Baum lived in South Dakota during the peak of the populist movement and published a newspaper there during this period. He wasn't observing these economic disasters from a distance. He was in the middle of it. He would have seen the foreclosures happening to his neighbors. He would have covered the political debates in his newspaper. He would have watched families lose everything while politicians in Washington insisted the gold standard was necessary for America's future. When The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published on May 17, 1900, Baum presented it as simple entertainment for children. His introduction stated the book was meant to be a modern American fairy tale, without the nightmares and heartaches of traditional European tales. Just a fun adventure story about a girl trying to get home. Nothing more. But 1900 was also the exact year Congress passed the Gold Standard Act, officially cementing gold as the basis for American currency and crushing the populist movement's last hopes. The timing seems too perfect to be coincidence, so let's break down the alleged allegory, character by character, symbol by symbol. You can decide for yourself whether Baum was writing innocent entertainment or hiding something revolutionary in plain sight. Dorothy represents the common American citizen. She has no wealth, no political connections, no power. She's from Kansas, the American heartland being devastated by the economic policies we just described. She's swept up by forces beyond her control, dropped into a strange world where nothing makes sense and everyone tells her what to do. She's every man, or in this case, every woman, just trying to survive and get home. The yellow brick road represents the gold standard itself. This is the path that Eastern establishment politicians and bankers insisted everyone must follow. Stay on this road, they promised, and you'll reach prosperity. Trust the system. Follow the golden path. Don't question it. Don't deviate. But notice what happens in the story. The yellow brick road doesn't lead to salvation. It leads to a fraud. It leads to a wizard who can't help anyone. It leads to smoke and mirrors and empty promises. Dorothy's three companions represent the groups being crushed by this economic system, and each one believes they're fundamentally broken, that they're missing something essential. The scarecrow represents American farmers. Think about how society portrayed farmers in the 1890s. Simple, unsophisticated, hayseeds who didn't understand complex economics. The scarecrow believes he has no brain, that he's stupid and incapable of clever thought. But watch what actually happens throughout the story. The scarecrow constantly comes up with solutions to their problems. He's the most clever of the entire group. Farmers weren't stupid. They were organising politically, forming cooperatives, understanding monetary policy well enough to challenge the entire economic establishment. They'd just been told they were stupid so often by so many powerful people that some had started believing it. The Tin Man represents industrial workers, and his origin story is genuinely disturbing. In the original book, the Tin Man was once a real man named Nick Chopper, who fell in love with a girl. A witch cursed his axe. Every time he swung it, the axe cut off a piece of his body. First his leg, then his arm, then the other leg, the other arm, his torso, finally his head. A tinsmith replaced each severed piece with metal until Nick Chopper had become entirely mechanical. When the transformation was complete, his girlfriend took one look at what he'd become and ran away screaming. Only then did he realize he'd lost his heart. Not the organ, but his ability to feel human connection, his soul. This is what industrialization was doing to American workers. Brutal factory conditions, dangerous machinery grinding up bodies, long hours turning people into exhausted automatons. The industrial system was dehumanizing workers, turning them into mechanical parts, disposable and replaceable. The Tin Man's quest for a heart represents the working class's desperate attempt to reclaim their humanity from a system designed to extract every ounce of labour while giving nothing back. The Cowardly Lion represents William Jennings Bryan himself, and contemporary readers would have recognised this immediately. The lion has a mighty roar, just like Bryan's legendary oratory skills. But the lion believes he's a coward, that he has no real courage despite his impressive voice. Bryan could roar. His speeches could shake buildings and make people weep. But he couldn't win the actual fight. 3 times he ran for president. 3 times he lost. He had the voice, but not the political courage or skill to actually change the system when it mattered most. Now, who are they fighting against in this story? The Wicked Witch of the East represents Eastern industrialists and bankers, the people actively benefiting from the gold standard and the economic policies crushing ordinary Americans. And what happens to her? Dorothy's house, representing the common people, literally falls from the sky and crushes her to death. Even accidentally, even without meaning to, the people destroy the Eastern establishment's power. The Wicked Witch of the West is less clear in scholarly interpretation. The theory suggests she might represent the harsh environmental conditions of Western expansion and drought, or simply another face of the oppressive forces trying to stop ordinary people from finding solutions. In Baum's book, she's described as dried up inside, barely alive, and when water touches her, she dissolves like she was never real in the first place. Just concentrated wickedness in the shape of a person. And then we reach the centre of everything, the revelation that ties it all together, the wizard himself and the Emerald City. The Emerald City represents Washington, D.C., the seat of political power where Dorothy and her companions believe they'll find answers. The great Oz lives there, and surely someone that powerful can solve their problems. But here's a critical detail from the book that MGM's film completely changed, and this detail might be the most damning political commentary in the entire story. In Baum's original tale, the Emerald City isn't actually green. Every person who enters the city is forced to wear green-tinted spectacles locked onto their heads. They're told it's to protect their eyes from the city's magnificent brightness. But the truth is, the spectacles make everything look green. The city itself is ordinary, maybe even shabby. The prosperity, the beauty, the emerald glow that gives the city its name, it's all an illusion created by forcing people to see reality through tinted lenses. This is propaganda in its purest form. The government and bankers kept insisting the economy was prosperous, that the gold standard was working, that everything was fine. They forced Americans to see poverty as prosperity, economic collapse as necessary adjustment, mass suffering as the price of stability. Just keep wearing the green glasses. Keep believing what you're told to see. Don't trust your own eyes. Don't trust your own experience. And the wizard? The great and powerful Oz who everyone believes can solve their problems? He's a complete fraud. When Dorothy and her companions finally meet him after their long and dangerous journey, they discover he's just an ordinary man from Omaha, Nebraska, who crashed his hot air balloon in Oz years ago and convinced everyone he had magical powers. He's a humbug, a con artist using tricks and smoke and mirrors to appear powerful. He admits it himself when they catch him behind the curtain. Some scholars suggest the wizard might specifically represent President William McKinley, who championed the gold standard while presenting himself as a man of the people. But the broader symbolism cuts deeper. Political leaders aren't actually powerful. They're ordinary people creating the appearance of authority, ruling through illusion rather than actual ability to help citizens. The wizard can't give the scarecrow a brain. He can't give the tin man a heart. He can't give the lion courage. All he can do is hand out worthless trinkets, diplomas and medals and testimonials, while pretending these meaningless tokens solve real problems. He's powerless. He was always powerless. The entire journey was based on a lie. Even the name Oz might carry hidden meaning. Some theorists point out it could be an abbreviation for ounce, the unit of measurement stamped on every gold bar and silver coin. Baum named his magical kingdom after the measurement that determined whether families ate or starved, whether farms survived or failed, whether workers earned living wages or watched their children go hungry. So what's the message hidden in all of this if the theory is correct? Dorothy and her companions journey to the Emerald City, believing the wizard will solve their problems. They follow the yellow brick road because that's what they're told to do. They trust that external authority, that concentrated power in the capital city, will provide salvation if they just follow the rules and ask politely. But the wizard can't help them. He's powerless, a fraud behind a curtain pulling levers and hoping nobody notices. What Dorothy and her friends discover is that they never needed the wizard at all. The scarecrow was always intelligent. The tin man always had compassion and humanity. The lion always had courage. They possessed these qualities the entire time. They just didn't recognize them in themselves until they'd been through the journey and proven it through their actions. And Dorothy learns the most important lesson at the very end, when the good witch Glinda finally reveals the truth that changes everything. Dorothy always had the power to go home. Those silver slippers she'd been wearing since the moment she arrived in Oz had the magic to transport her back to Kansas any time she wanted. The solution was on her feet the entire time. She just didn't know it. She didn't believe she had the power, so she never tried to use it. If the populist allegory is real, this is the most radical message in the entire book. The silver currency solution was always available. The common people already possessed the answer to their economic problems: bimetallism, silver coinage, the policy that would increase the money supply and break the stranglehold of Eastern bankers. They just needed to recognize it and use it instead of following the yellow brick road, the gold standard path that the establishment insisted was the only way forward. The message is revolutionary. Ordinary Americans don't need to rely on powerful elites, fraudulent political leaders, or oppressive economic systems. They already have the power to change things themselves. The system is rigged. The leaders are frauds. The prosperity is an illusion, and you already possess the solution to your oppression. You just need to recognize it and act. That's a dangerous message to hide in a children's book. Now here's where the theory gets complicated, where scholarly debate becomes fierce, and where we have to be honest about what we actually know versus what we're inferring. Despite how perfectly everything seems to align, despite the remarkable coincidences of timing and symbolism, there is zero direct evidence from L. Frank Baum's writings, letters, or recorded statements that he intended any political allegory. Nothing. No diary entries, no letters to friends, no interviews where he hints at hidden meanings. Baum explicitly stated his goal was to entertain children and create an American fairy tale that was purely imaginative, without the moral lessons and darkness of European tales. When Henry Littlefield published his famous article, The Wizard of Oz Parable on Populism, in American Quarterly in 1964, he was presenting an interpretation, not revealing confirmed facts about Baum's intentions. Littlefield himself later clarified that he never claimed Baum wrote with conscious political intent. His article was meant as an educational tool, a creative way to teach students about Gilded Age history by examining how symbols in a familiar story aligned with historical events. Academic debate on this question remains intense and completely unsettled. Economists like Ranjit S. Dighe have written extensively supporting the populist interpretation, arguing that the historical timing and symbolic alignment fit too perfectly to dismiss as pure coincidence. The symbols work too well. The timing is too precise. Baum was too embedded in the crisis to not have it influence his work. But many literature scholars remain deeply skeptical, pointing out that without evidence of authorial intent, we risk falling into apophenia, the tendency to see meaningful patterns where none actually exist. We are projecting our own interpretations backward onto an innocent text. Children's literature scholars often argue most forcefully against the theory. They point out that universal themes like home, friendship, courage, intelligence, and compassion don't need to be coded political messages. These are timeless human experiences. Sometimes a fairy tale is just a fairy tale, expressing fundamental truths about growing up and finding your place in the world, rather than commentary on specific historical events. Some scholars have proposed completely different interpretations. Baum's mother-in-law was Matilda Jocelyn Gage, a radical women's rights activist and freethinker who was arguably more extreme than Susan B. Anthony. Baum also had documented interests in theosophy, a spiritual philosophy movement that emphasized finding truth within yourself rather than through external authority. This has led some scholars to interpret the story as a spiritual journey allegory, or as a feminist tale about a girl hero who solves problems through her own agency and intelligence, rather than waiting for male authority figures to rescue her. Dorothy saves herself. That's radical in its own way for 1900. The academic community has no consensus on which interpretation is correct, and likely never will unless new evidence emerges from Baum's personal papers. So here's the question we're left with, and it's a fascinating one. Does authorial intent actually matter? Let's consider what we know for absolute certain. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published in 1900, the exact same year Congress passed the Gold Standard Act, officially ending the populist movement's hopes for silver currency. The symbolic elements in the story do align remarkably well with major political issues of the 1890s. The gold standard, silver currency, William Jennings Bryan's failed campaigns, farmer and worker exploitation, fraudulent political leadership, and the illusion of prosperity masking widespread suffering. Baum absolutely lived through the panic of 1893. He witnessed the populist movement firsthand while living in South Dakota. He worked as a newspaper editor during this period, which means he was deeply immersed in these economic and political debates. He would have covered these stories. He would have seen the human cost. He wasn't an outside observer, writing from a comfortable distance. But we also know Baum never confirmed political intent. He explicitly stated the book was children's entertainment, and the populist theory wasn't even proposed until 1964, which was 25 years after the famous MGM film and 45 years after Baum died on May 6, 1919. Here's my perspective. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum. When Baum sat down to write in 1900, his imagination was shaped by his world, the economic suffering he'd witnessed personally, the political movements he'd covered in his newspaper, the debates over currency and power that dominated every conversation in his community. Even if he didn't consciously decide, I'm going to encode a populist manifesto in this children's book, those concerns were part of his reality. They would naturally influence his creative choices, the same way any writer's work is influenced by the time and place they live in. If someone today writes a story involving a pandemic, economic inequality, climate change, or political corruption, even if they're trying to create pure fantasy or entertainment, those contemporary concerns will seep into the work. They're inescapable. They're the water we swim in without even realizing it. The populist interpretation might not reflect Baum's conscious plan, but it absolutely reflects the anxieties and struggles of 1890s America. And that makes the interpretation valuable for understanding both the story and the historical period, whether Baum sat down intending it or not. What nobody can deny is that examining the story through this lens adds profound richness to a tale we thought we knew. It demonstrates how art can carry multiple meanings simultaneously, how the same story can be read differently by different generations, and how historical context can reveal depths we never suspected existed. For most Americans, the 1939 MGM film is their only experience with The Wizard of Oz. The movie became a cultural institution when annual television broadcasts began in 1956. Generations of Americans grew up watching Judy Garland sing Over the Rainbow every year, making it a shared cultural experience that transcended individual families. But the film changed the silver slippers to ruby, which means if the populist allegory was intentional, the movie accidentally neutered the most important symbol in the entire story. Most people don't even know the slippers were originally silver. They're watching a version that's been stripped of its potential political meaning. The Wizard of Oz has influenced countless adaptations over the decades: Wicked, The Wiz, Return to Oz, and many others. It's one of the most watched films in American history. The phrase, "there's no place like home," became embedded in American cultural language, instantly recognizable across generations. Yet the vast majority of people who love this story have no idea it might secretly be about monetary policy, economic oppression, and the corruption of American democracy. Whether or not Baum intended the allegory, it serves an incredible educational purpose today. Using The Wizard of Oz to teach about the Gilded Age, the populist movement, the gold standard debates, and late 19th century American economic history makes these topics accessible and engaging in ways that traditional textbooks often fail to achieve. Students remember the lessons because they're tied to a story they already know and love. The symbols make abstract economic concepts concrete and memorable. Maybe the most disturbing aspect of this alleged hidden meaning isn't whether Baum intended it. It's how relevant the story still feels today. A story about ordinary people realizing that political leaders are frauds hiding behind curtains of illusion. About common citizens possessing solutions that powerful elites refuse to acknowledge or implement. About economic systems deliberately designed to benefit the wealthy while crushing everyone else. About farmers and workers needing to unite against corporate interests and corrupt financial institutions. These themes haven't disappeared from American life. The specific debate over gold standard versus bimetallism is historical curiosity now, settled and irrelevant to modern economics. But the underlying struggle continues in different forms. Ordinary people versus concentrated power, workers versus exploitation, democratic will versus elite control, the illusion of prosperity versus the reality of struggle. Maybe that explains why the populist interpretation gained traction, specifically in 1964, right in the middle of the civil rights movement, and growing questioning of government authority and traditional power structures. Maybe that's why it continues to fascinate people today, even those who've never studied 1890s economic history. We recognize something in the story that resonates with our own experiences. We see ourselves in Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. We've all felt powerless at times, waiting for authority figures to solve our problems, following the paths we're told to follow, trusting that the system will work if we just play by the rules. And we've all had that moment of realization that pulling back of the curtain, when we discover the wizard is just an ordinary person with no more power or wisdom than we have ourselves. So whether L. Frank Baum consciously intended it, whether the allegory is historically accurate or represents modern readers projecting their own concerns backward onto an innocent children's story, The Wizard of Oz has become a tale about recognizing your own power, about refusing to be fooled by illusions and propaganda, about questioning authority and finding solutions within yourself and your community, rather than waiting for salvation from distant power centers, about realizing that the golden path you've been told to follow might actually lead nowhere, and the solution might be something you've been wearing on your feet the entire time without recognizing its value. Dorothy was right. There's no place like home, but getting there requires more than clicking your heels and hoping magic will transport you. It requires recognizing that you had the power all along, understanding how to use it, and having the courage to act instead of waiting for someone else to save you. The yellow brick road doesn't lead to answers. It leads to questions and disillusionment. And maybe that's exactly the point, whether Baum intended it or not. The most important journey isn't following the path laid out for you by others, by authorities who claim to know better, by systems that promise prosperity while delivering oppression. The most important journey is realizing you have the power to walk your own way, to question what you've been told, to see through the green-tinted spectacles you've been forced to wear, to recognize that the wizard is a fraud, the city's prosperity is an illusion, and the solution was never in the Emerald City at all. It was with you from the beginning. You just needed to believe it. Thank you for watching.